Hello and welcome to Amaranthine Art. Today I'm going to be showing you a card that I made using the new My Favourite Things stamp set called Space Explorers. I'm going to be starting today by stamping my images with Memento Tuxedo black ink onto some Nina Solar White cardstock. I'm going to be using Copic to colour my images, so I want to make sure I use an ink that's not going to smudge. I've recently created a card very similar to this and shared it on my social media, and I've had quite a lot of questions as to how I did the colouring on the space images as well as the background that I created, which was a space galaxy background using distress inks. So I thought I would take this opportunity to create a video showing you how I created that card, or one very similar. So as you can see, I'm using my Copics to colour the images. For the spacesuit, I wanted a dirty grey spacesuit rather than a crisp white. And I'm leaving some areas lighter where I think the highlight should be, and then using darker shades to obviously add in those shadows. So I'm using a selection of warm greys for the spacesuit, and I'll also use the same warm greys for the moon. The colouring of these images did take quite some time. I often go back and do lots of layers, start very light and then work up to the darkest bits. It's easier to work lighter to dark than it is to go from dark to try and get it lighter. So that's my preference on how I do my colouring. It does take some time, but I find that it's worth it. So I have sped this up quite a bit so that you don't get bored with hour-long videos of me colouring. I've tried not to speed it up too much so that you can see what's going on, but if you do have any questions you can leave me a comment below. As always with my videos, there will be a link in the description box to my blog where you'll find a full list of the colours of the Copics that I've used in today's video, along with the rest of the supplies that I've used. So as you can see, I've now moved to the moon and I want to create that spherical shape. So I'm leaving a edge all around the outside that's lighter and then a darker concentration in the towards the center. This helps it look more dimensional and give it that illusion of a sphere. So that's why I've done the colouring that way, and as you can see I'm just dotting on some of that dark and mid-tone grey to give it some more texture. So I'm just using all the greys at the moment. I'm using the same greys throughout the whole of the card, even on the rocket with the metal bits. I was thinking of swapping it to a cool grey, but for consistency I thought I will keep it to a limited number of colours. And again, I'm adding the darker bits where I think the shadows should be and leaving it lighter where I think the highlight should be. Once I've finished the colouring, I will use a white jelly roll pen to add some highlights, which you'll see me do shortly. Once I've finished with the greys, I'll then move on to doing the skin tone. I'm adding some BV000 for some shadow, and again I'm concentrating that in the areas where there would be a shadow on the face, so underneath the hair and round the back of his face towards the helmet. I'm using some different shades. I'm using E21 and E11 to create a nice skin tone look. I'm then going to use E27, E23 and E33 for his hair. Again, towards the top and back towards his helmet is where the darker area will be. I'll then use the mid-tone to pull that darkness out and then concentrate the lighter area towards the tip of the hair. I often find that once I've done the first layer, I then go back and add another layer to create more definition and more contrast. So for the rest of his suit and the rocket, I'm using 3 shades of red. I'm using R89, R39 and R27, adding from dark to light. This is one of my favourite combinations of red. I think it works really well. It's a really vibrant but rich red, so I think it works really well with the rest of the colour scheme for this card. It gives a really nice pop of colour on what is a fairly neutral card. There will be some colour in the galaxy space background, but otherwise it's a fairly plain coloured card. To add some more colour in, I'm colouring what I would think this is as Saturn. So I'm adding those gas-like elements to the planet by adding some wiggly lines, if you like, in darker colour, and then blending it out with a mid-tone and a lighter colour to create that gassy texture effect. And then I'm just adding some more colour around those rings as well. So once I've done that, I'm then ready to add my highlights in. So where I think there would be light that hits these images, I'm creating some highlights with my white Jelly Roll pen. And sometimes there's no science to this, you can just go in and add highlights. I've tried to keep mine fairly similar so that I can create consistency across the card. And again with the moon, I'm adding some white dots to add some more texture. I'll add some more to Saturn. Again, it creates the illusion that that planet's moving and it's not a static image in the sky. I've finished with my highlights. I'll then use the coordinating dies to run it through my big shot machine and cut those images out. Now for my background, I've recently discovered that Strathmore Bristol Smooth is brilliant for distress inks. So that's what I'm going to use today, and I'm going to cut a square using the Lawn Fawn Stitch Stackables out of the Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock so we can create that space image. To create my space galaxy background, I'm starting with crushed olive, and I'm going to start in real time and then eventually speed this up. So what I'm doing is I'm adding some colour onto the edge of that blender, and then I'm using the edge to kind of feather it onto the page, and then I'll use a sweeping motion which creates a really nice wispy effect, which is what in the end pulls all this together. So bear with me, it will look better once I've finished. So I'm adding some concentration of that green colour and flicking it across the page to create multiple shades of that one colour across the sky. And it looks like it's a burst of colour that's, you know, the nebulas and the galaxies that are within the space sky. So that's what I'm aiming to create here. I'm then going to do the same but with seedless preserves, and once I've done that I'm then going to use chip sapphire to add in some more definition to the sky. So as you can see, I know it's a bit difficult to see, but I'm literally adding some colour and dragging it across the page. I'm using the edge of the blender because it's easier to control. If I was using a bigger page, then I would just use the whole blender. But as I'm using a fairly small amount on a fairly small background, the edge works better. So I kind of ink up half of it and turn it on its side and then blend it out. So where I've got that white, I'm now going to add the chip sapphire. This will help bring it all together and look more like a night sky. I will darken this down with the black soot towards the end, but for now we just want to fill in the rest of that white area with a bit of blue. And again, I'm kind of crossing over some of that green, sweeping it out across the page, helping it to blend and mix, and it creates a really nice texture, and it looks like the sky is moving rather than it being a static image. It did take quite some time to do this because I started with a light hand and I build up the colours as I go. Again, it's easier to add more and make it darker than it is to take it away and make it lighter. And I know space scenes are generally quite dark anyway, so for me I like to add in those bursts of colour and then start to add in the blues and the blacks to bring it all together. So I'll just keep swapping back, again adding more of that green on top of some of the blue, again helps it all bring it together, adding some more purple in. And I just keep going backwards and forwards until it looks how I want it to look. So now I'm going to add some of that black to bring it all together, darken it down and make it look like a space scene. And I'm using a fairly light hand with a sweeping motion, again the same as before, as well as the circle motion that I usually use to blend for the edges. So for the middle bits, I know it looks blocky at the minute, but I will start to blend this out using the sweeping motion towards the middle, adding in darker areas between the pops of colour. And if you bear with me, it will look like a space scene. I know at the minute it looks a bit of a mess, but it does start to come together. It just takes some work. You can of course try this with other colours as well. I've done it with reds and aquas, as well as the lime greens. For me, crushed olive just looks amazing in space scenes. I use it a lot. It was one of my favourites when I was experimenting with different backgrounds. You can actually see the ones that I was playing with and experimenting with on my Instagram account. That's where I got a lot of questions as to how I created this kind of background. So that's why I wanted to create a video showing how I did it. A lot of people were intrigued as to how I made it look like nebulas and galaxies and things. So you can also check out my accounts to see what I've been up to and what I experiment with, so you can see the kind of different things I come up with. So I'm still going backwards and forwards with those colours, tying it all together, trying to pull it in, making it look how I want it to look, and adding more of that black to give us, and blue, to give us that space scene. Obviously the stars make a sky come alive, so we'll be adding those in shortly. You can use other paper as well if you do have other paper. Personally, I've recently discovered that Bristol Smooth works best. It gives a really nice blend. It's smooth, you don't get blotchy textures, although at the minute this might look a little bit rough. When it dries, it tends to smooth things out a lot more, and I find it a lot easier to blend on Bristol Smooth. I also use watercolour cardstock. I find Nina too blotchy and takes a lot more work, but that's just my personal preference. I'd encourage you to experiment and play around and find what works best for you. So to create the stars, I've added some acrylic white paint and some water into a spray bottle, and this is going to be the first layer. And don't panic, I'm going to spray quite a lot on here because I want bursts of clusters of stars. I'm then going to dab it off so it creates a bleach effect. I want these to be background stars, so I don't want them to be bright white. I just want to create that texture of a lot of stars. I'm then going to take a brush. You can use the actual spray applicator, but I found it easier dipping a brush in and flicking it across the page. This is what's going to create those focal stars. They won't dry bright white because I've used water in this, but it gives a bit more definition. I'll use a jelly roll pen to add some bright white stars in myself, because I want the main focus to be the images, but obviously I want this to be a key focal point, but I didn't want a ton of white stars to overpower it. So for my sentiment, I'm using some white Hero Arts embossing powder, and I'm using the sentiment Have a Blast from the same stamp set and embossing that onto the bottom of the space panel. I dried the image first with my heat tool to make sure that that embossing powder didn't stick where I didn't want it to. So I've added some foam tape on the back of this panel and I'm adhering it down to a 6x6 white card base. This is going to be the size of my card for today. And then I'm going to add some more foam tape to the spaceman, and then I'm going to adhere the moon and the other planets down with some double-sided tape. So as you can see, I'm just adding some more stars along that background with the jelly roll pen. This just creates some more clusters of stars that stand out against that dark background. And I really like how these backgrounds come out. You can play around and do different shapes and colours and find out what works best for you. So that finishes the card for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give me a like if you did and leave me a comment. I'd love to know what you think. Please subscribe for more and I'll be back next time with another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.